Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, sure. And you go by Leo.
Yeah, I go by Leo. It's easier.
How do you pronounce your last name?
Pongeluppe.
Pongeluppe. Okay.
Thank
And
you.
Lucas, is Lucas Lauriano here?
I think he will join, but I am the one presenting, so he might
Okay.
join in a couple of minutes.
Okay. Okay, people are starting to join.
Yeah.
We'll wait a couple of minutes till more people join.
Should I test sharing the screen just
Yes,
for...
please do that. That would be great.
And I believe you can now see my slides.
Perfect. Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, we'll wait another minute or two.
By the way, thank you so much, Deborah, for helping organizing the backstage. And yeah, thanks for all the interactions by email.
Of course, not a problem. We're so glad you're able to join us and present today.
Thank you.
Okay, shall we begin? I'll introduce you. You can pull up your slides.
Yeah, sure. Perfect.
Okay, great. So for the last session from this morning on our shareholder sharing prosperity track, I'm delighted to introduce Leandro Pongeluppe, PhD candidate from the Rotman School of Management, the University of Toronto. And also we thank Lucas Amaral Lauriano, assistant professor at the IESEG School of Management in Lille, France, should be joining us. And they will be talking about the stakeholder capitalism, organizations' capabilities, promoting individuals' freedom. Sounds really fascinating. And we're looking forward to your remarks. Take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gina, Deborah, and all the organizers. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you, Lucas, also for coming to the session. I would like especially thank my PhD supervisor, Nina McGann, that is also joining the call, and all the other guests. Thank you so much for making the time to come to our presentation. So I'll share my slides. It would be wonderful if you can just give a thumbs up if you can see them. Just a second, let me put it in presentation mode. Perfect.
Perfect, thank you.
Great, wonderful. Oops, let me just move the video here. Sorry about that. Yes, okay. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be one of the papers selected to participate in the, I believe, the first Inclusive Impact Summit, right? I think this is a fascinating endeavor of the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation. I've been following the seminars, monthly seminars, and the discussions are always amazing. I think in great terms, thanks to Mike, that do a wonderful job as stimulating the discussion, right? But also in terms of the content of the topics and the participants. So wonderful to be here with you. This is a paper that I've been working with my friend and colleague, co-author Lucas Amaral Lauriano, and it goes by the Stakeholder Capitalism, Organizations' Capabilities Promoting Individual Freedom. Well, let's jump in. I think it's undeniable that capitalistic system leveraged millions out of poverty, right? So the market mechanism is indeed a powerful tool which individuals' self-interest leverage and extend the benefits to the whole society by the promotion of new business, new endeavors, new ideas, right? And this progress is possible mainly because people have the freedom of choice, right? They can freely choose what they will do. They can freely choose what enterprises they want to pursue and how they will allocate their efforts in the marketplace. These ideas were described mainly by, I think, one of the exponential of these ideas is Milton Friedman, right? That not only expressed these ideas on his writings, but also in this famous TV series that used to be broadcast openly in the 80s called Free to Choose, right? In which Professor Friedman explained the power of the market in solving many of the societal problems. However, as we all know, and despite the Friedman's descriptions about the benefits of capitalism, we see that this economic system has concentrated income and opportunity over time and kept most of the people marginalized or in a marginalized condition, right? So it's interesting to see that Gina and I are using here the very same statistics from her opening slides that in 2018, 26 individuals accumulated more money than the 50% bottom income population in the world, right? So it's really a system that has been concentrating income and mainly concentrating opportunities. And you might be wondering, who is this guy on the bottom picture? Is this like Karl Marx or any socialist leader? And unfortunately, it is not. This is a philosopher that I personally like a lot. Is a Slovenian philosopher, contemporary philosopher called Slavoj Zizek, that coined this phrase that in the current capitalistic system, people have the freedom of a forced choice, right? So people can choose whatever private healthcare plan that they want, but most of the people don't have income, not even to choose any one of them, and are usually neglected healthcare when they need the most, right? And considering this puzzle and this tension between these two approaches on the positives and negatives aspects of the capitalistic system, Lucas and I have been discussing what are the role of organizations in shaping prosperity, in shaping shared prosperity among individuals participating in the system. And then we reach our research question that is precisely, how can organizations use their capabilities to level individuals' freedom, to level individuals' capabilities and freedom? Please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to interrupt me on the fly. I think the most we do this exchange is the better. So if there's something not clear, please just raise your hand. And to answer this question on how organizations' capabilities might shift individuals' freedom, we'll anchor our analysis in three main blocks. First, the capability approach developed by Amartya Sen, also a Nobel Prize, that mainly wrote what are the characteristics, how important it is fair access to opportunities and equality for people to develop their capabilities. We will also anchor this on the literature about organization capabilities as described by the new stakeholder management. So basically, how organizations can redeploy their resources, reorganize their capabilities, and manage their stakeholders in the trying to reach better performance for the firm, but also for all the stakeholders involved in this process. And backed by these two literatures, we built a model based on the famous poverty trap models in economics, trying to explain the logic of what we are calling an exclusion trap, right? So how does it work and how organizations might move people out of this exclusion traps? So as you can see, this is a very much theoretical paper, but we hope with this we generate insights for theory development and also for empiric testing, right? So let's start with Amartya Sen's ideas, right? So I will bring here two quotes from Professor Sen in which he expressed how actually individuals' capability work and how the market can help in fostering these individuals' capabilities. So the first one, Professor Sen in 1993 says, quote, "The freedom to lead different types of life is reflected in the person's capability set. The capability of a person depends on a variety of factors, including personal characteristics and social arrangements." So in other words, Sen is telling us that capability of individuals will depend on their initial endowments, on their personal characteristics, but also on social arrangements, on the structure of economic systems in which they are in. And next, Amartya Sen says, quote, the market mechanism does, of course, arouse patience in favor as well against it. But fundamentally, it is no more than a basic arrangement through which people can interact with each other and undertake mutually advantageous activities. Thus, it's very hard to appreciate how any reasonable critic could be against the market mechanism in general. The problem that arises springs typically from other sources, not from the existence of markets per se, and includes such concerns as systematic exclusion from the use of the process and fruits of the market operations. This have to be dealt with not by suppressing markets, but by allowing them to function better and with greater fairness and inclusiveness. So I think this goes very much, end quote, this goes very much in line with the conversation that we were having earlier today about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how this might affect an inclusive endeavor of humankind, right? And we try to complement this with organizations' capabilities, especially backed by the stakeholder management literature. So here I just bring two definitions. The first one is about capabilities in the managerial sense. So Barney says, firm resources include all assets, capabilities, organization processes, firm attributes, information, knowledge, etc., controlled by a firm that enable the firm to conceive and implement strategies that improve efficiency and effectiveness. And the definition of stakeholder management, in which they say that it requires its key attributes simultaneously attention to legitimate interests of all appropriate stakeholders. So again, our main endeavor here is to understand how the capabilities of organizations might help individuals to develop their own capabilities and therefore shift them out of an exclusion trap. And to do so, we will describe to you what we understand by exclusion traps. I'll start here with the notation. Right? So we have Z or Z, that is the individual initial endowment. So as Amartya Sen was saying, the individual's characteristics, right? So we can think about them as a continuance here. So let's say the health status of an individual from very sick here in the Z lower bar to completely healthy Z upper bar and now in between. We have a C of Z, there is a organization's capability function. So we can think here about the healthcare provision cost, right? So the cost to provide health to all individuals depending on their level of health condition. We have YZ, that is in the individual income function, so how much money they make per month, per year, etc. And we have WZ, that is the well-being of those individuals, right? So how well they feel, how prosperous they feel, right? So what we can see in this model is that if we analyze an individual that is slightly above Z hat here, we can see that with this health condition, this individual have more income than the cost of health provision. So slowly and gradually, this individual will progress to an upper equilibrium in which they will reestablish their full health condition, and they will be therefore in a higher position in their well-being. On the other hand, if you have individuals with lower Z's than the Z hat, they have less income than the requirement for reestablishing their health. And then consequently, they will gradually progress to a lower equilibrium in which their health will be depleted over time, right? They will never be able to jump to a higher equilibrium here. So what we can see is that there are two main equilibriums here. Either individuals will be trapped in this lower stage, in this case health, but we can think about income, we can think about education processes, or they can progress to a higher equilibrium in which they will realize their full potential. This is pretty much the model used by economists to explain the poverty trap, right? So the less income you have, the less likely you are to progress to high levels of income because you are never having enough income to satisfy the costs of living, for instance. Right? So that's interesting as a model. But what is the role as managers, as management scholars? What is the role of organizations here? And that's precisely the innovation that we are trying to bring to this model. We are arguing that organizations can shift this capability provision and help people to move out of this poverty trap or exclusion trap. So let's suppose an organization dedicated to provide healthcare shifts this curve from this point to this lower point here. So I'll play it again so you can better visualize. We were in this condition, and then the organizations providing healthcare are able to shift their cost, providing healthcare to a lower cost to individuals. So the individuals that were in these levels of endowment or in these health conditions between Z hat 1 and Z, they will now be pulled into the inclusion zone. They will be pulled out of the exclusion trap here because now they have more income than the cost of healthcare, and then slowly and progressively they move to a higher equilibrium. In the ideal scenario, organizations and institutions will be able to push this capability provision curve even lower to the point that everyone, independently of their initial endowment, independently of their initial Z, they will all be pushed to a higher equilibrium, they will all be included, and they will all experience higher levels of well-being, right? And this is precisely what we analyze here. We have several examples in which this occurs. We have examples, for instance, from the environment, right? So we have this organization called Natura, which Professor Anita Maguire and I are doing some studies about it, in which they see the initial environmental condition of a location, they redeploy and readapt their capabilities to provide more environmental conservation, and therefore they increase the well-being of local communities because now they can sustain themselves and preserve the environment at the same time. We also have in the literature organizations such as BRAC, the Bangladesh Rehabilitation Assistance Committee, that given gender identity of individuals, so their initial endowments with respect to gender, they provide a series of interventions pushing for gender equality in Bangladesh. And this increases at the end the well-being of individuals in these conditions. So several areas we see that organizations are able to shift their capabilities in order to pull people out of an exclusion trap towards an inclusion zone. And this is great economically speaking because we have data showing that inclusion of minorities is correlated with economic growth. So in a simple model that we analyze in this paper, we see that 1% change in minority inclusion is related to 0.43% changes in GDP per capita at purchase power. So we can see that in including more people, we can achieve higher levels of economic growth. So everything is great so far, right? We can see that organizations have the option to include more people, and when including them, they can achieve better performance, both for their organizations and the economic terms. The problem is that, as we all know, the world is going in the wrong direction, right? So in here, we are plotting the scores of each one of the countries represented here on their minority inclusion scores in 2014 and 2018. And as we can see, countries are worsening. So they had higher scores in 2014 than in 2018. They are moving to this right side of our graph here. Very few countries are actually improving their conditions. So less inclusion is happening in the world. More people are being locked in the so-called exclusion traps. And in the long run, the development models might lead to income concentration, social exclusion, and suitable development, right? So the question that we had in mind when we saw this analysis is that if we see that there are positive outcomes economically and socially and environmentally for inclusion, why aren't organizations doing that? Why isn't the world moving in the right direction? And for us, the reason, as we saw in the presentations of the other colleagues that talk today, is because organizations, they are not fully internalizing the payoffs of their stakeholders. And we model this as well using the famous prisoner dilemma game. So let's suppose we have two organizations, A and B. They have a decision to be inclusive to minorities or not inclusive. Assuming that this capability function that I was describing before is costly for the organization, they might have an economic incentive to not invest in being inclusive and free riding on the inclusivity of other organizations. But if all the organizations think like this, their best response will be to behave not inclusive, and the national equilibrium will be in this lower payoff zone in which neither organization will be inclusive. However, if organizations start considering the payoffs of their stakeholders that are affected by this inclusive or not behavior, the situation might change. If they start internalizing the negative externalities generated by this negative inclusivity of theirs, they start moving the national equilibrium from this not inclusive area to an inclusive area in which they are getting higher payoff themselves, and they are also generating higher payoffs for the stakeholders and therefore for the whole society. So we conclude our theoretical endeavor here saying that organizations can be a key driver for changing lives. If they structure their governance systems, if they design measures and incentive systems, and if they act with a moral duty to include the disenfranchised, they can, as we can see here on the right, they can generate more inclusion, open more opportunities, develop individuals, help them to progress in their social cultural capital, increase their productivity, which will generate at the end more income for those individuals and therefore their freedom in the Senian terms. At the same time, in acting like this, organizations might generate more income, as I said, which will generate again more consumption, more savings, more investment, and high growth for societies, as we saw that GDP can grow with inclusion. So our framework for stakeholder capitalism put the organization in the core as a core important driver for this change, because organizations can and should shift people out of those exclusion traps. And to conclude, we are almost reaching the time. There are four main contributions that we believe this paper delivers so far, and we are looking forward to hear what you suggest us to do next. The first and foremost contribution is to link the Senian ideas of individual capabilities with the strategic management concepts of organizational capabilities. The second is to develop this concept of exclusion traps, highlighting that organizations have the capacity to shift their capability provision and therefore move individuals that are trapped in an exclusion zone to an inclusion zone where they will develop their well-being and where they will have higher levels of income and welfare. Third, the paper shows how this is the best interest of organizations as long as they internalize the payoffs that they stakeholder have. And finally, we finish our paper showing this paradigm of a stakeholder capitalism, saying that enacting inclusively to minorities, enacting inclusively to society, organizations can be drivers of change and can foster shared prosperity among us all. And with that, I close my presentation. I'm very much looking forward to comments and questions. Thank you so much.
Well, that was just fascinating and really profound. I'm sure we'll have some questions and comments. Here's a question from Elsie. Any insight into the thresholds at which, and it just disappeared, at which decision makers are persuaded of the negative costs of non-inclusion or of the positive advantages of inclusion?
Thank you so much, Elsie, for raising the question. I think activities such as this conference and others that we are seeing that are raising awareness about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and the importance of organizations, especially for-profit organizations, to care about their stakeholders are steps towards this direction, right? So as I was discussing before, the key driver for change, in our opinion, is that individuals and their organizations understand that their payoffs are not only a fact of their financial performance, but are also a result of the internalization of stakeholders' performance as well. And I believe the more we push those organizations to understand that this is a key factor for themselves and for the whole system, the more we'll progress in this direction. Unfortunately, I think there will be a lot of backs and forths in this, but hopefully we are moving towards this direction.
Fabulous. Lekha has wonderful topic. Can you guide us through what organizations' capability provision may mean? Does this have anything to do with how they transfer their capabilities to individuals? Any insights on how this transfer may be affected? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lekha, for raising this point. So we depart from this strategic management definition of capabilities, right, as factors that help organizations to be effective and efficient on their production. What we are claiming here is that organizations can use this know-how, their resources, and their knowledge to shift specific costs of provision of goods to individuals to lower areas. And in doing so, they can include individuals that were on those endowments, a lower level of endowment. So I'll give you an example. If we think about education or schooling, if organizations can adapt their resources to include child or families that have lower level of abilities, they might be helping those individuals to progress to a higher level, a higher equilibrium, in which they will potentially be fully included in the economic system. Again, as I was talking about healthcare, if we think about healthcare provision in a lower cost, we might be providing this healthcare to individuals that couldn't afford it before, and in doing so, we are moving them towards an equilibrium with higher health condition in which they will prosper economically and contribute to a shared prosperity. So, in a nutshell, I think organizations can use their capabilities to promote inclusiveness, to promote the inclusion of individuals, and this might have consequences not only socially, but also positive consequences economically for the organizations and for the broad economic system.
Great, thank you. Catherine, do you want to ask your question? Unmute yourself, since you have two questions.
Actually, I was wondering about the emphasis on income in the first model that you showed, because there's been so much research on, especially in terms of systemic inequities, on wealth rather than income. I mean, we know, for example, in terms of African Americans, the community's wealth tends to be lower because of many factors, including real estate redlining, which means that houses are worth less, and then, say, parents don't have that generational wealth to pass down to their children. So that was one of my questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. And this is a wonderful area of research, which is very close to my heart, because I'm Brazilian by background, and I do research with populations living in favelas or urban slums, right? So we didn't have redlining policies per se in Brazil, but we had some sort of informal redlining processes in which populations with lower level of income, usually associated also with other disenfranchisement characteristics, were set in areas that are considered favelas, right? And this is exactly the process that we exemplify with our exclusion trap, or we can see in the poverty trap. These individuals were in lower levels of endowment in terms of educational development or educational access. They might have lower health conditions than their peers, and the system, they were in lower paid jobs, and they cannot progress, they cannot move out of this poverty trap because the costs that they face are usually higher than the income that they generate. For instance, in another research of mine, I see that the individuals in favelas are charged higher prices for deliveries of e-commerce to their location. So imagine a population that already have lower income are now charged more to access the exactly same goods that the population outside that have higher income can access with lower prices. So you're retrofitting this loop of exclusion, or you're retrofitting policies that are regressive, right? So they keep losing and losing more income given the characteristics and given the conditions that they are. And the idea here, or the objective of this paper, is to show that, wait a minute, organizations such as these e-commerce firms might have a say in that. If they treat these populations more equitably, they might be pulling them out of this exclusion trap to a higher equilibrium in which they are not only included, but we will also have a higher well-being by accessing goods, opportunities, and having higher income levels. I mean, I know that this was a little bit broad, but I hope to be touching on some of the points that you raised. Thank you so much.
And my second question was how you're defining stakeholders in terms of actual identities, groups, et cetera.
Yeah, so I'm departing from the stakeholder management definition of stakeholders, in which they define stakeholders as all individuals that have some interest in the activities of an organization or of a firm, right? So I'm defining as really anyone that is somehow affected or are interested in what the organizations are doing. But I would be curious to hear your comments and takes if there are other definitions that we should consider as well.
Well, one is just the surrounding community in terms of how the presence of a particular firm may affect the well-being of the community. I mean, there are a lot of others, but that's just one that came to mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful definition. I think we were just concerned of defining surrounding communities because there might be areas in which the organizations might affect the global community, right? So they are not necessarily geographically proximate to this organization itself. But anyway, I think this is an ongoing discussion, and it's nice to hear your takes on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Lekha, would you like to ask your question? Or you want me to read it?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you. I just wanted to inquire, from what you explained, it sounds a lot like what is the concept of creating shared value, where they talk about making affordable products and services for the marginalized section or the disenfranchised sections of the society. I'm also thinking how the same thing, reducing this exclusion gap may be applicable to situations where such people are actually employed within the value chain of the company, because it is another way a company can approach to reduce this exclusion gap. Any comments on that here?
Yeah, thank you so much, Leica, for this follow-up point. I mean, it's interesting because I started getting interested on this literature precisely because of research on these areas of shared value or the bottom of the pyramid and markets and so on. I think the difference here is that usually the BOP literature would say firms or organizations should do this because it's profitable. And I think there is a set of instances in which this is true. And it's important to understand them. What we are bringing here is that firms and organizations should do this not only because it's profitable, but because this is their duty of care with their stakeholders. Their stakeholders, broadly speaking, conceive legitimacy to these organizations to operate. So it's their duty to foster the well-being and the prosperity of those individuals as well in return. In some instances, this might generate higher profitability for those firms. In some instances, not necessarily. But in the long run, by taking care of those stakeholders, these organizations will generate a system in which they will prosper economically as well as socio-environmentally. That's a little bit of what we are thinking about when we were discussing this paper.
Very interesting. Yeah, I also was seeing a lot of what I thought was overlap with shared creation, shared value creation. So that was helpful to distinguish that. Thank you. All right. Any other comments or questions before we close? We have a couple more minutes. Matt had a comment. So much has been written about the market, both pro and con, so I suggest limiting generalizations about it. For instance, we're seeing an upcycle of industrial policy right now, something Milton Friedman would have hated.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. All right. Do you have any final comments, Leo, or will, I don't see any more questions. But that was
Yeah,
really great. I really enjoyed that presentation.
Yeah, no, I just want to once again thank you. Oh, I see Matt physically raise his hand, so please.
Oh, Matt, go ahead.
You are muted, Matt. Sorry. Matt, you're muted.
Someday I'll learn. Unfortunately, this wonderful concept of individual freedom is being redefined daily in the wrong direction, in my view. It's becoming seen as me, and to hell with the community. So I think it has to be wrestled with, since it's plays such a prominent role in your title and your work, and maybe you even come up with a way within the stakeholder framework to begin to address it, rescue the term, because it's such an important one.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing this. I like, if I may, this is very much kind of in a philosophical way of thinking, right? So we are departing here from the concept of freedom defined by Amartya Sen, but I agree with you, to some extent that concept, that definition also follows some sort of individualistic utilitarian way of seeing freedom, right? Whereas we might think freedom in a broader sense or in a more communitarian sense. I also like the discussion that, for instance, philosophers such as Isaiah Berlin has about positive and negative liberties, right? So negative liberty is like your freedom to say no to a lot of things, and your positive freedom is freedom of access, freedom of opportunity. So we are struggling a little bit to wrap our minds around it, and I would love to hear takes from you, Matt, reading recommendations, and yeah, it's an interesting endeavor, at least.
We're struggling with it.
Yeah, one related concept is the tragedy of the commons, which I think is really profoundly important for people to recognize, that when we use up resources, there's going to be nothing left, but there is a way to share it in such a way that everyone has enough. And that's been around since 1968. We actually do a workshop on that. All right. So thank you very much. This has been fabulous. We really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing everyone at our next session, which is coming up at 12:45. We're going to have a health equity panel led by Erin Byrne, our executive in residence, with several speakers, as well as our own Gloria Bachman from the Women's Health Institute. So we hope to see you at 12:45 at the health equity panel. We have a fabulous afternoon planned, so stay with us, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
It was awesome.
Have a good one.